And there we are. We're live. We're live. And uncharacteristically with me is today's co-host, Darren Davies. Hey, Darren.
Hi there.
We'll do the proper intro to the show in just a few minutes. We were just getting set up. It does look like perhaps Eric won't be with us today. He's going to try to join in late if he can. But you know, we're here to talk about Mac Mythconceptions. Boy, I'm going to have to say that.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah, Mac Mythconceptions. It's easier to type than it is to say. I'll just put that out there. Now, again, we haven't started recording yet. You know, very often, Darren, what happens is I'm left here by myself vamping for a good 5 to 10 minutes before Eric joins in the live stream.
That's unusual to start on time.
Yes, it's unusual to start on time. It's unusual to start with the actual recording of the show, but we will get started with that in just a moment. You mentioned that it's a bit of a dreary day there where you are located.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's very similar to yourself. I can see people outside my window walking in very heavy coats with their hoods up, trying to evade the rain, and it's not working for them very well, but they seem reasonably happy. But there's rain everywhere.
As much as we want to cast aside our winter jackets and get ready for the warm summer months, the rain comes, and we just can't do it. Even on a warm, rainy day, you want to have a jacket of some sort to kind of protect yourself from getting soggy.
You certainly do.
And it's about to rain here, too. So Apple Weather has been popping up notifications consistently for about the last 45 minutes saying that rain is imminent.
Rain will start in a few moments.
Rain will start. It hasn't started yet. So I don't know why Apple spent all that money buying. Who is it they bought?
It was quite good, actually. Yeah, the guys who was it now? I've forgotten who it was now.
Somebody's screaming it at us right now. I can't recall.
They certainly are, yeah.
It wasn't Carrot Weather. Carrot Weather is still its
No, it wasn't those guys. It wasn't those guys.
Oh, Dark Sky.
They were highly regarded. That's it, Dark Sky. Yeah, they were highly regarded and still are. And I think it's become pretty accurate. And I like the new detail in the weather app as well, especially on the iPad when you can delve in. It's really good.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's much better. But yeah, for the most part. There are some aspects of it that aren't quite as good, but especially on the watch. Have you noticed that? I do not like the way the weather app works on watchOS. Where are we at now? Whatever.
What version
of watchOS are we on?
I have a very, very cheap and nasty watch. So
10.4.
Wow, I'm so out of date with the OS versions for the watch.
I wanted to say 10.3, and my brain was telling me that wasn't right. 10.4, yeah. But 10, just 10 in general, the weather widget app / whatever you want to call it on the watch is just way too complicated. I want to tap the widget, and I want you to tell me the conditions. That's it. Just tell me what's going on. And now you have to scroll through all the different types of precipitation and humidity and temperature and just
too much.
Tell me what it's doing right now. That's all I want to know.
It could
And
be context aware would be good, wouldn't it? Because if, for instance, you had a really bad pollen day, then that could be the thing that shows up first. So context aware rather than having to scroll through lots of things would be a nice addition that the Apple guys could add.
isn't that what the weather app on the Mac does? Doesn't it do perhaps on the phone too? Doesn't it do context aware? So if
Yes, I
it's
think so.
raining,
Yeah,
you get the
and it'll
precipitation
start off with
map.
the rain. Exactly, it'll
Yeah,
start off with that, and does the watch do the same? As probably not. So yeah,
not that I can tell, but what do I know?
cool.
What do I know?
Well, more than me because I don't have an Apple Watch. Unfortunately,
Oh,
I've
I
got
thought you
this.
did.
This
Oh,
No,
a
I've got a cheap and
Casio.
nasty one.
Casio?
But yes, Casio, very old school, cheapy watch.
I love it.
I am planning to dive into an Apple Watch at some point in the future.
You are not the only person to be rocking a Casio classic LCD watch. I tell you that. In fact, I believe it's in that door right there. I have my original Casio calculator watch.
Oh, that's the dream. The calculator watch, especially when you were at school.
It was
Rocking the
huge.
calculator watch was the biggest thing in school at the time
Yeah,
when I was a
yeah.
mere lad many years ago.
And in my fit of experimentation with various smartwatches through the years, I have the it's packed up now. What was the Microsoft watch? The SmartLink. I have a
Oh
SmartLink.
God.
I have a SmartLink,
Okay.
and I also
Is
have
there
a
anything
Moto
left to link it with?
360. I have a
Oh, I
Moto
see.
360. Yeah, yeah. The SmartLink wasn't too terribly smart. I'll be honest. It was more about data transfer than it was smarts, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I think I remember the adverts for it actually. I'm thinking
Timex.
that's not going to go anywhere.
It was a Timex, wasn't it? Timex Data Link. The
Yes, that rings a bell.
Microsoft slash Timex, which is interesting because my first computer, as you know, was what would for a citizen of the
Timex
British
Sinclair, yeah,
Empire be a Sinclair. Well, you called it a ZX, a ZX Spectrum,
that's
but
it. The Sinclair
here
ZX Spectrum, but for you it was the Timex Sinclair, wasn't it? Yeah.
Timex here and in Portugal. In Portugal, it
Yes,
was also
Portugal.
the Timex Sinclair, and they had the 2048 and the 2068, and we had just the 2068. We didn't have the 2048 here. And it was the TC in Portugal. It was the TC, not the TS. So there you go.
That's it. Yeah. In the UK, it was all old school and the cheaper end of the market, so it was all tape based. But in
Hmm.
Portugal, I think disk drives were much more used over there. So they had all the fancy stuff in Portugal. They had the fancy disk drives. We had bits of tape and bits of what was the microdrive? The
Yes.
long reel of tape round up into a thing that looked like a disk drive, but it wasn't a disk drive.
Well, here's the idea for our podcast, Darren. Is we'll have to start a podcast like
Oh, retro show.
Spectrum Today or something like that,
Oh yes, yes.
because yes, the original data interface for the Timex Sinclair 2068 was in fact tape. We loaded with via tape, right? But
Yep.
the 2068 had something the Spectrum did not until later. Sinclair came out with one of these later, but it was not compatible with what Timex created, and that is a cartridge slot.
The interface one.
No, it was not the interface. It was literally a
Oh,
cartridge. You had cartridges, and you could pop it in and be
okay.
playing Horace Goes Skiing or whatever. So they were. It was like no tape. You just put it in, and boom, it was loaded,
Yeah.
which was great. So there was a little hatch on the side of the 2068 that you could put your cartridges in. And then interestingly, Timex Sinclair also released a cartridge slot for the TS1000, which was the equivalent of the ZX81 England.
Oh,
So we had a
right.
cartridge slot, and the big deal about that for the Timex Sinclair 1000 was that the cartridge slot add-on that popped into the interface on the back had a reset button on it. It had a reset button,
Oh,
which was
instant load time. Wow.
huge to have that reset button. So great. So we started with the tape interface. Trust me, folks, anyone who's watching this later, we are going to get to Mac stuff here soon.
It's, for Spectrum eyes only.
This is for Spectrum Eyes only. There's our companion podcast right there. But I did purchase a Interface One and Microdrives. I did purchase that. That was imported, and it was interesting
Fancy.
because the um, the cartridge slot, or not cartridge slot, the interface slot on the back of the 2068, the Timex Sinclair 2068, wasn't quite fully compatible with the Spectrum's expansion port. So you had to, in order to use the Interface One, you had to purchase like a secondary interface that fit in between the Interface One and
Oh
the
my God.
2068. The other interesting thing is that we also wanted to be able to run the full library of applications for the Spectrum, which meant we needed full compatibility with the Spectrum. Well, in order to achieve that with the 2068, there was an inventive person whose name escapes me at the moment, but he created something called a ROM switcher. And it was a little
Oh yes, that rings a bell.
board.
Oh yes, I think we've seen something similar here. Yeah,
It was a little board that you had to open up the 2068. You had to pull out the ROM that Timex put in there because if you
yeah.
booted it, it always said copyright 1982 Sinclair Research, blah, 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 blah. Well, there was an additional line for Timex. Timex had their copyright line, and then we had the Sinclair copyright line. And the difference in ROM was some of the extended capabilities that Timex added to the 2068. There were some higher resolution graphic capabilities and things like that that were not in the original Spectrum. All right, all that aside, to achieve the full compatibility, we had to get a ROM switcher. So you'd crack open the 2068, you would pull
Yeah,
out
and
the
then we
ROM,
switch them over.
and you would put it in the ROM switcher board,
Yeah,
and
and then
then
you could
the
switch between. Yeah,
the other ROM was a Spectrum ROM, and then
yeah.
that board fit into the ROM slot. Now that by itself didn't solve the problem. You had to be able to switch between the two. So
Oh yes.
there was a magnetic switch that was soldered into the ROM board, and then on the top case you had a little slider with a magnet in it. And if you wanted to be a Spectrum, you slid it one way, and you could hear a click. You could hear it go click, and you knew that you were switched over to the Spectrum ROM. And then if you slid it the
Yeah,
other way, you'd hear the little click, and you were over to the Timex ROM.
and hopefully you weren't in the middle, which meant you had no ROM when you turned it on.
Yes, it was
Nothing
not
would
good
happen.
if it was in the middle. And when the little the slider was just plastic with a sticky backing on it that the magnet slid between. And when that broke, you had to be super careful not to accidentally nudge it because then it would switch while you were in the middle of doing something.
Oh dear.
So that was another addition I made to the 2068. And then the final edition, which I really, and you mentioned this a moment ago, that I was really, really thrilled to be able to get, is there was an outfit that supported the Timex and Spectrum computers here in the States out of New York, I think. I'm trying to remember where they were located. But they imported the Portuguese disk drives. So there was
Oh,
the
I see.
Portuguese TC 2048 and 2068 had a 3-inch, not
Yeah,
3.5 inch, it was a 3-inch
yeah,
disk drive unit, two drives. The
yeah.
thing was massive. It was massive.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
It was the width of the 2068 because the idea was you would plug it into the expansion slot on the back and then slide the 2068 up underneath it. So it had a little lip so you could slide it underneath and all that. So that was the FDD unit, very creatively
Yes.
named, the
And
floppy
I
disk
believe the
drive unit.
discs. I think the 3-inch discs could be flipped over, so they were double-sided.
They were double-sided, yes. And they were the
Yes.
same discs used within Smith Corona typewriters. Smith Corona typewriters used these 3-inch discs, and
And the Amstrad PCW and CPC.
yes, yes, yes. Well, when you can't buy these discs in the States, nothing used them here except for the Smith Corona typewriter. So if you wanted discs,
I've got some in a drawer, actually.
do you? Well, I know I
I
have
can't
some.
read them now. I can't. I can't do anything with them at all. But I could
Well,
probably put together some sort of interface to USB and get a drive to actually be able to read the contents.
I imagine you could.
Potentially,
I
I think it's
imagine you could.
possible. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of guys creating stuff out there, strange interfaces.
Anyway, so
I
that
want.
was it, when I needed discs, I would have to go to the local. Well, we didn't call them this that at the time. The local big box store that sold discs for the Smith Corona typewriters, and buy a 2-pack of the discs, and then those could be reformatted for use on the
Yeah,
Portuguese Timex floppy disk drive unit. And you're right; they could flip over. I think they were 180K, something like that on a
oh,
side.
that's exactly right. Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
it well. It's 180k, 183k potentially
yeah.
on both sides. So you could fit quite a lot of Spectrum content on one side, flip it over, and have a whole another. It was almost like having a hard disk back in the day for it, because the Spectrum stuff was so small.
It,
180k was enormous.
it was like having a hard drive, except very, very fragile hard drive. And an even more fragile hard drive were the microdrives that you were
The
talking about.
Microdrives, they were very fragile.
They would hold 100K, and I had one of those, and several cartridges that I sure would like to read one of these days. There's actually an inventive person who created a microdrive work-alike that reads and writes SD cards in place of the tape cartridges, and you can buy that now. It's like $100. You
Yes.
can buy it and plug it into your Interface One, and you're on your way.
Yeah.
And then the final interesting thing, this is my progression of storage for Sinclair Spectrum computers throughout the years, is the most recent model Sinclair Spectrum I own right now that's sitting right there is
Oh,
my
you're
Spectrum
next.
Next. My Spectrum Next. And yes, it will work with the Interface One. Yes, it will probably work with the Portuguese floppy drive unit. And yes, it will work with tape, but it also has an SD card slot.
Yeah.
So
Oh wow. That's the dream, isn't it?
put a 2 GB SD card in there, and you can put
Wow.
practically every single Spectrum title ever released on there.
If you showed me the Spectrum Next when I was like 10 years old, I would have flipped my lid.
Yeah, amazing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely amazing. So the nice thing about that is that my display for my Mac Studio has a dual HDMI input on it,
Oh,
and
awesome.
I pulled one of that's the other thing. The Spectrum Next has HDMI out on it. Has HDMI out.
Luxury, pure
So
luxury.
I pulled an old computer out from under my desk here, disconnected the HDMI cable to it, and said, "Oh, wait a minute. This can be used for my Spectrum Next." So
Wow.
I'm just going to set it up on my desk next to the Mac Studio, and
You've got a dual mode Specky Mac or Mackie Spec or whatever you want to call it.
I will
I
be
don't know what you would
covering
call it.
I will be covering nearly my entire life of computer usage. One more note. So yesterday I was attending a webinar hosted by Ecamm, by the way, which we were talking about a little while ago before we went live. Hosting a webinar, and one of the session leaders started out with a poll. And the question was, what was your very first computer? And I fired up the poll and I typed in, do you know what I typed in? You know what I typed in, don't you?
Yep, the Timex Sinclair ZX Spectrum.
Nope. Nope.
No?
Older than that.
Oh, the ZX81?
Older than that.
ZX80?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I got there
Yes.
eventually.
Yes. My very first computer that I owned was a Sinclair ZX80. And I typed that in there and actually got a comment from the session leader. It was one of those live streaming type sessions. Actually got a comment. He went, "Oh my gosh, someone typed in Sinclair ZX80. There's someone out there who's actually older than I am." And I don't know that that's true.
Oh,
I don't know that that's true. I don't know how old he is, but and I will fully admit that I purchased mine used secondhand from a friend of mine who had it. He built it as a kit, I believe. It was originally sold as a kit computer. He
mm.
built it as a kit and then sold it to me for $50 in a lunchroom trade at high school. So that was my first computer.
Yeah, that happened here as well. Kids would buy up some of the guys who were good at soldering. They would buy up a few kits and sell them on made, um, build the kits and sell them as made kits. So, yeah, same thing sort of happened here. Yeah.
And I will tell you the other thing I have, and then we'll go on to recording the show. The other thing I have is in this closet to my left, right here, I believe. I believe it's in there. I came across, gosh, I don't know where I came across this, but I came across someone who had uncovered a cache of old original Sinclair ZX81 kits
Oh,
as they were originally sold, and he was just selling them. He's like, if you're interested in one, here, I'm selling them. And I'm like, I'm buying that. I'm buying that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
I have in there an original Sinclair ZX81 kit in its original uncompleted format, and I have no intentions of ever assembling it because the collectability aspect of it is that it's an
Absolutely.
original
Yeah.
kit computer that's never been assembled. So yeah, so that's here too. I don't know how I would display that. It's basically a
Oh,
plastic
that's tricky,
chassis
isn't
and
it?
a system board and a whole bunch of capacitors and ROM
Have
chips
you
and stuff
have you
and
seen
baggies.
have you seen the artworks of an exploded iPhone where they put all the components onto a board
Yeah,
and frame it as a frame?
yeah.
So you could do a similar thing for a ZX80
I
81.
could. I could. That would be interesting. I could do that. Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. We'll continue this Sinclair discussion next time you're on. So,
No worries.
in the meantime, or we'll think about that podcast idea. In the meantime, let's get started with this show. We are 28 minutes and 50 seconds into it, which is fantastic. So and I told family that we're going to get right to it. I said Eric's not coming on, so we're not going to do our usual blah 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 blah. And now I'm
Oh,
realizing that all that blah 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 is me. It's my fault. It's my fault that we're always late because I'm the one who keeps delaying things.
oops.
Oops. So, with that said, I am going to resize the window here in front of me and get ready to start recording and see if I can say Mac Mythconceptions. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. It's for Mac Guys Only, episode number 431 for April 26th, 2024. Mac Mythconceptions. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And coming back on the show, not to discuss gaming, although that is a pretty big myth about the Mac, but to come on and share his thoughts on Mac myths and mythconceptions is Darren Davies. Hey Darren, how are
Hello
you
there.
doing?
Hi.
Now, for anyone who is joining us, remember we do normally record for Mac Guys Only live on YouTube the second and fourth Friday of the month. And if you would like to come hang out, ask questions, and be part of the live studio audience, be sure to subscribe to the show at youtube.com/FMEO TV. Oh, and if you are joining us live, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat room too. So if you have any questions or comments as we move along, drop them into the chat room and we'll try to address them here on the show. Well, Darren, after a week of listening to Mike attempt to relate, clumsily, I might add, how to build a shortcut for making thumbnails from PDFs, I think it's time for something a little easier to digest this time around. So, when you reached out and you shared your frustrations with all the FUD, as they call it, the myths, the myth conceptions that are all floating around out there about the Mac, and you know what? Not only about the Mac, but about Apple products in general, I
Yeah.
asked if you wanted to come on and share your thoughts on the matter. And the lists, well, they're endless and they're not new. We talked about that just before we started recording. A lot of these things that we're going to talk about today are not new myths, and yet they persist, they hang on, and they stick around. And I would say even some of these Mac myth conceptions that we're going to talk about go back to the 80s, which is coincidentally right around the time that PCs rose to prominence in the workplace.
That's it. Yeah, some
So,
of them do.
yeah. So I thought we could tackle just a few of the myths, myth perceptions. No, let me try that again. I knew I was going to have trouble with this. So I thought we could tackle just a few of the myths, the misperceptions, and the outright fallacies that surround the Mac. And to do so, I know that you brought a few to the table, and I've got a handful too. So, what do you say we get started?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
All
Well, like
right.
you said, there's so many to choose from. There's a lot of misinformation that gets spread around, mainly by people that don't understand what they're spreading,
Yes.
which is the most frustrating part of trying to counter misin. And the trouble is when you encounter so many, you sometimes give up and say, well, I can't be bothered to correct you because there's too many misconceptions flying around all over the place. But we try our best to put people right. But yeah,
We
I mean, I chose about five, but I could have probably chosen 20 topics, and we're going to cover about three or so, I think, mainly, but because it's difficult to really dive into some of the deeper ones. But yeah, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of misconceptions out there.
well, if you were to pick from your list, and I brought a few to the table as well, if you were to pick from your list and say, okay, this has got to be one of the biggest Mac myth conceptions out there, what would that be, and how can we set people on the right path again, Darren?
Oh, that's a tricky one because I think we were going to leave that one out because it's such a big one
Oh,
to delve into. But that was that would definitely be the Apple slowing my devices down to make me buy a new
mm,
one, and linked into Batterygate, or what became Batterygate, which was nothing of the sort. So there's massive misconceptions, not only with that overall subject of power management, which is natural for every device in the world to be managed by battery management software. I mean, that's how technology works. Every piece of technology in the world works in the same way. Um, but it's just there are so many. It's not just one misconception. That covers many misconceptions inside of that misconception in a way. So it could be something a bit too of a big subject to delve into. But I could give you a little bit of an overview if that's
well, why don't we talk about it? I mean, if this is now, see, in my opinion, I thought this whole Batterygate thing was kind of behind us. But as I mentioned before we started recording, it's still out there, and it's not just about the iPhone, but it's about the Mac as well. So yeah, why don't you give us an overview of that one, and then we'll jump into some of the other misperceptions that
sure.
are out there.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons we might think it's over and done with is that the misconception on Batterygate itself has morphed into a similar subject, which is planned obsolescence. Apple doesn't plan to obsolete your devices. In fact, they do entirely the opposite. So what happened with Batterygate was that users were having problems with devices just stopping, closing down, crashing. This was on older devices, and users asked Apple, is there anything that can be done about that? And when Apple investigated, they found that batteries that were a particular age, around the 3-year mark, 4 years possibly, they get to and this happens to every single battery for every device on the planet, so it's not unusual. Batteries can't hold a certain peak level when the CPU requests it. When the CPU is requesting something particularly strenuous to do, an older battery won't be able to sustain the peak level to furnish that request. So it will just shut down. So what Apple found that they could do was they could, and this is extremely clever, I thought. It annoys me that Apple are people castigate Apple for doing this when the solution is actually really very very clever. What they do is they predict when a peak amount of power is going to be required by the CPU, before it gets to that point. So the software the battery management software can then ramp down the level of requested power by slowing the CPU down, but only for that time when the piece of software that was going to make it crash will no longer make it crash. So it's not like slowed down permanently, it's only slowed down particular times. So then Apple said, yes, we can solve this with a software update. They put the software update out, and they wrote a message inside the update, which this is, again, a thing that's very annoying because people should read them, but nobody reads them. But if they were to read what Apple wrote, they put down exactly what this update does, and it solves the issue of older batteries making devices just turn off when they've got a charge in them. So the update did exactly what it was designed to do, and it was exactly what customers asked Apple to do. And then customers are surprised when they run a benchmark, which is something that requests a peak power level, which older batteries can't supply, and they complain, oh, Apple's making my device run slower when I run a benchmark. Well, of course it does, it's supposed to. So Apple were only doing exactly what they were asked to do, and they delivered exactly what they said they would, and it worked exactly as they said it would work in a perfect way. It's almost a textbook example of a perfect software solution to a problem that looks like a hardware problem. So it's extremely clever and very well done. And they did all the right things, but people tend to just carry on saying that Apple is intentionally obsoleting their devices by making them go slow, which is ridiculous.
Do you think some of the animosity towards Apple may have been because, yes, they did share what they were going to do. Yes, they did put it out there and say, this is what's going to happen when you make peak demands on a device. But do you think that Apple could have maybe come out with something, a way to explain it in a much simpler way? In other words, a Mac versus PC type way, right? Why do we want to buy a Mac? Well, look at PC fall over because PC has a virus. It's a very simple, straightforward message that they were sharing in commercials. And maybe Apple could have been more overt with their explanations. Maybe they could have been
I think you're right there.
open.
I think you're right. I think it's the communication of the update wasn't too well, wasn't done as well as it could have done, to simplify it, because it is a complex problem. I mean, power management of devices and like the heat envelope of a device and how much RAM it uses, how much heat that produces, and how much the device can dissipate the heat, for instance, before it fails, and so on, and heat envelopes. It's an extremely complex area to get
Hmm.
perfectly right, and also it's a complex area to explain to people. So I think you're right there that if they did a better job of explaining it in a much more simple way, much more digestible way, then they may have headed off the issue. But I mean, they ended up giving people cost price battery replacements. I know because I had that myself. My own phone was doing this, and I applied the software update. It was great. It did its job. It was perfect. And then instead of the £80 or so it costs to replace the battery, fully fitted, of course, and it's done whilst you wait, and it's a really good service, which goes on to this day. But they offered replacement batteries for £29 instead, fitted free. So I went and took advantage of that. Got a new battery for my 3-year-old phone. Revamped the phone really, really well. In fact, I was able to then sell it on when I upgraded for more money because Apple gave me this free upgrade, essentially, well, a cost price upgrade. And they've since had to spend out millions to give to people who brought a class action lawsuit against them for slowing down their hardware,
Yeah.
when the solution to the problem was to slow down hardware when it needs to be slowed down with an old battery. That's just how computers work.
Yeah.
And battery management software works on almost every device, including PCs, in the same way to manage expectation of what the CPU is asking for and what the battery can supply. So devices are designed to do this, but I still can't understand why Apple are thought of so badly in this area, and the whole Batterygate thing shouldn't really exist.
Yeah. Well, they're a big giant, and big giants, Goliaths like to try to take them down. So it's interesting because you can actually see this sort of thing happen if you pay attention with a MacBook Pro. Now, you don't see it quite so much with a phone, but not just a MacBook Pro, not just a MacBook Air, but you'll see this happen on PCs as well, as you rightly
Yes,
indicated.
yeah,
The
absolutely.
moment you unplug power from a portable laptop, a portable Mac, a portable PC, whatever, the moment you unplug power, the very first thing you'll see is the screen dim. And
Yes.
if you pay attention, you'll also notice that the processor throttles back. It's no longer running at peak performance because, as you said, in order to meet the expectations, we have certain expectations for how long a battery should last in a laptop. In order to meet those expectations, guess what? You can't be running full on robot power. You have to pull back. You want 22 hours battery life? Great. Here's how we're going to give it to you. And you can visibly see it happen just by simply unplugging your laptop.
And to be fair, Apple have done a wonderful job with Apple Silicon to make that not so much of an issue, because you often see tests on YouTube videos where they have a PC laptop plugged in and the Mac not plugged in,
Hmm.
because the Mac will run at full speed whether it's plugged in or not plugged in, whereas the PC won't. So as soon as you unplug
Right.
the PC, they dramatically fall in performance.
Yeah. And that's a good point. That is clearly a difference between the Apple Silicon line of Macs and the Intel line of Macs. I guess my comment comes from someone who's an owner of an Intel MacBook Pro, and I can see this happen. In fact, I often forget about it. You're using your laptop and then you plug it in and you see the screen bright and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. I was running at reduced power. No wonder I couldn't do that thing as quickly as I thought I should be able to. Good way to open. Good way to open. And I think one of mine that I'd like to bring up is kind of peripherally related. This also comes from the PC world. I'm not sure where and when this started, but it persists to this day. And that is that the Mac isn't compatible with business software,
Oh, oh, right, yes, which is wrong.
which is wrong. And there's a companion myth to that one, which kind of goes hand in hand, and that is that Macs are only for people in the creative field. And those two really go hand in hand because what business software are we talking about? Are we talking about Microsoft Office? Are we talking about the Adobe Creative Suite? Are we talking about QuickBooks? Are we talking about Zoom? Or maybe they're talking about DaVinci Resolve, or maybe they're talking about Microsoft Teams, or even OBS. And one thing you'll notice is that a good chunk of those applications I just mentioned are for creative types. A good chunk of those applications are for business types. And then there are those apps that cross boundaries, right?
Yeah.
But every single one that I mentioned is cross platform compatible. And yes, it's true that not every single piece of software that's written for Windows has a version for Mac OS. And it's also true that there are a ton of custom built tools that were developed for Windows or in the business world developed for DOS, and they will never, ever see the light of day on Linux or Mac OS. But that list is getting shorter all the time. And with more and more apps moving to the model of software as a service that are running through a web browser, which I know is something you wanted to bring up, the myth of those apps like Salesforce is a good example. The myth of
Mm.
apps like Salesforce not being available for the Mac is getting harder and harder to support. Not only that, but where there isn't a native Mac OS version of an app, there's nearly always a functional equivalent, which is one of my favorite ways to go. Or there's the ability to run a Windows version of something in, oh, let's say, crossover.
Yeah.
Or the oldie but a goodie, there's virtualization. Now, I know that you encounter this fairly frequently. You work in an educational institution. What types of things are you seeing in terms of Mac versus PC versus other operating systems where folks just say, oh, no, 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 I can't use a Mac because it won't run X? Is there anything like that that you encounter?
That's a good question. I actually work in the health area, so I'm in the NHS. So it's not education. I used to work in education, but I actually work in health.
My mistake.
But
My mistake.
no worries. But it's a similar type of thing because there are sciences involved in both. And like you say, it's funny that you mentioned some of the older applications not being able to, or not ever having a version that will run natively on Mac. Sometimes those apps also have the same trouble running on the latest version of Windows. So even though
Right.
they're a Windows app,
Yeah.
sometimes they won't run on Windows. So
Yeah.
so you're not safe sticking with Windows. I mean, there are a lot of things you can run that, as you say, are cross-platform. All of the big stuff pretty much is cross-platform. And one of the other interesting things, especially on the scientific and health point of view, is that many of the in-depth scientific apps are written for Linux, or sorry, Unix, I should say, not Linux. So they naturally run on systems that are Unix based. So since Mac OS and Linux is Unix based, they run those applications natively. And often you find that a scientific application will be created for Unix first, and then there's not much work that needs to be done to make a Mac version, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make a Windows version. So but that's, and sadly that's where the money is. So the developers will often make a Windows version after they've made the Unix version of their scientific software. But that's also good in a way for the Mac side of things, because you can mix and match machines. You don't have to have Windows only machines. You can have Windows machines, Linux machines, and Macs, all being able to run some of this very specific scientific software that you would possibly not expect there to be a Mac version of. But because it is natively a Unix machine, and that's what scientific software is often developed for. Naturally, a Mac version emerges because it's just very easy to make one.
Mm.
So the misconception goes the other way around as well. So not only thinking that software isn't available for the Mac, you could say that certain very niche software is more likely to have a Mac version because it's developed on Unix.
And as I was going through my applications folder looking for things that are traditionally thought of as Windows business applications, I was coming across apps like Final Cut Pro. I was coming across apps like Pages and Numbers and Keynote. I was coming across apps like Billings, which is a billing app. I'm just kind of going through my applications folder again here. But there are countless apps that, like you said, are only available on the Mac. And
Yes.
when you are looking at switching the other direction, can often be the stoppers that prevent you from moving over to Windows.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
Often it's less of a downside to choose a Mac to run software that can run on Windows, because you'll often find, as you say, either an equivalent or the real thing
Right.
as a very good version. Sometimes or often the Mac versions of Windows software actually runs nicer and better and is nicer user experience to use anyway.
Yeah.
But turning it on its head, going the other way, you could criticize the Windows landscape for saying there's so much wonderful Mac software out there that you can't run on Windows, and flip it on its head.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, Darren. We talked about Batterygate. One thing we didn't mention in regards to Batterygate is there seems to be a rumor out there, and again, we talked about this just before recording, and we don't need to go down this path. But interestingly, I came across a rumor or misconception about the Mac that the battery life is not as great as PC laptops, and that I think that kind of goes hand in hand with Batterygate. I don't know where the heck that comes from. I mean, we're talking about even the 2018 generation of MacBook Pro had fantastic battery life, especially compared to an
Yeah, for an
equivalent
Intel
PC.
machine, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Intel machines, they were very good, comparable.
So I have no idea where that came from, but I just thought I'd mention it because it's one of those misconceptions or myths about the Mac that just seems to spring out of nowhere, and yet it persists. And you can say until you're blue in the face, well, this MacBook Pro has upwards of 20 hours of battery life, and yet they won't believe it. But with
Until they
that
use
said,
it, yeah.
but with that said, what would be the next myth or myth conception about the Mac that you would like to bring up?
Oh no, I've got to choose one now. I'll probably go with the web standards one then next. Or shall I? Shall I
That's
do
a
that
good
one?
one. That's a good
Yeah.
one. And it's something that I talk about here on the show all the time.
Well, I hear you're a bit of a web developer yourself, actually. So
A bit, but just in terms of browser compatibility, one of the things that you mentioned, or I know you wanted to bring up, and I'll let you speak to this, is that more and more developers seem to be taking the lazy route and just coding for a single browser. And that single browser that they code for is the one that happens to currently, and I emphasize currently, have the most market share.
yeah,
And that would be Google Chrome. Now,
yeah.
this is a textbook example of the phrase everything old is new again, because this is the exact thing that we went through in the 90s with Internet Explorer. Everyone coded for Internet Explorer because it was the
Yes.
browser that had the most market share. And gosh darn it, if you used any other browser and it didn't work, the answer was almost always, well, fire up Internet Explorer. Well, good luck doing that if you're on a platform that didn't support it, right?
Yeah.
And that's less of a problem these days with Google Chrome, as Chrome is found on just about every platform out there. But it's still a problem. It's a big problem, and it's a problem that
Yeah.
developers need to get over. You need to not develop to a browser, but develop to standards.
Quite right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The it's very annoying that there are still developers out there that take the very easy and, as you say, lazy route, or as I probably originally said, the lazy route of just developing on one platform, and worse than that, only testing on that one platform as well.
Exactly.
So you end up with web apps and code that can fall over and fail on other web browsers when that should never happen. Um, the W3C guy, so that's the as in three W's and a C for consortium. That's the World Wide Web Consortium, is a standards body. It's a worldwide standards body for web coding. If web developers coded to that's what the standards body puts out, then you're virtually guaranteed that your web apps and your code will work on every single browser and every single platform on the planet. It will just work. So it's very annoying when people or some web developers are too lazy to investigate how to code things properly, and they use undocumented features and various tricks of what they can get out of a single browser, and they only test on that one browser, which then fails on other browsers. So it shouldn't be down to the user to have to be told what browser to use. They should
Right.
be allowed to use their preferred browser. And if things are programmed against standards, then that should be the way the world works. But unfortunately, there are some web developers out there that just don't do this. And the problem is that people that are buying web technologies to on behalf of their business or the university they work for instance, they they are not web developers either, so they don't understand the problem that they're buying into. So they'll buy a web application and run it on what the web developers tell them to run it on,
Hmm.
not realizing that they're storing up a problem for all the users they ask to use it when it's going to fall over for them, or potentially just stop working. I've seen this in a medical study, that a range of people are part of a medical study that seems to work only on Chrome properly, which is very annoying because when the user quite legitimately rings up support to say, "Oh, I need a little bit of a hand with this because this code you'd asked me to run as part of the medical study is doesn't work properly on my browser," they're often brushed off. They don't get the the fault through to the developers to investigate, and in fact, sometimes the developers aren't interested in investigating the problem in the first place,
Right.
and they just want to brush off the poor users by saying, "Well, just install Chrome and go away," which I find particularly nasty of them to do that.
It's nasty of them from a pure business perspective. However, you
Well, it
understand
makes
where they're coming
yeah,
from. It's a cost
yeah,
savings move. It's
they make more money.
strictly it's strictly cost savings. That's
Yeah,
what it's all about. When you can save money on tech support, when you can save money on documentation, invariably that's the route they're going to take. And
that's it. Yeah,
reaching for that lowest common denominator is one way to do that. If the very first thing you can tell somebody when they call for support is,
Just
Oh,
go away and run Chrome.
you're using Firefox? You're using Safari? You're using
Yeah,
Edge? Never mind that it's Chromium based. Oh no, you have to download Chrome and use that. You have to, you have to go through all these, jump through all these hoops. You have to go through all
that's right.
these, uh, you know, all these steps to make your computer work the way we want you to make your computer work, not the way you want it to work. Now,
Absolutely.
interestingly, I think you are kind of experimenting as we speak, unless I misunderstood what you said. We are currently using an application developed for the Mac called Ecamm Live. That's how we are not only live streaming this, but also recording. Now, I'm also recording on my mixer, but we're recording as well. And that's what allows us to do all this stuff like provide the frames around us and things like that. Well, in order for you to join the call, you are using a web interface that's provided by Ecamm in order for you to join in. And the system requirements for that are for best compatibility to use Google Chrome. And especially if you want to share your screen, you have to use Google Chrome. Secondarily, they recommend using Safari. Safari will work, but allegedly not if you want, as a guest, to share your screen. And if you're using Firefox, which is my preferred browser, well, forget it. You you have to use Chrome. Now, I have had luck using Opera. I have had luck using Edge. I've had some luck using Firefox. But the core of it seems to be the way that the audio and video get transmitted back to the server so that they make it to my end for managing everything.
Yeah.
What is it about Chrome that allows it to work? And maybe you don't know the answer to this, but what is it about Chrome that allows it to work when Safari won't work for screen sharing or Firefox allegedly doesn't work at all? And yet, I believe you said you're currently using Firefox, are you not?
I'm using Firefox at the moment, and the main reason for that is that I needed to have a little experiment with my Bluetooth mics because Safari through Ecamm through Safari doesn't allow the Bluetooth mic to be captured. So I was trying to experiment to see if that was different on Firefox, which it is. Although it turns out I'm actually using my iMac's mic at the moment instead because it sounded better than the. Because I think the Bluetooth mic is heavily compressed, or
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot of processing on the stream, which makes it not sound good. Ironically, not sound as good as the iMac's built-in mic. But yeah, I mean, that's another example of having to choose, not choose, having to use a browser that I normally wouldn't have installed to get a function from an application that should work in the same way everywhere. But
hmm,
I know that's quite difficult with audio and video, so I don't blame the Ecamm guys as such, because it's an incredibly good product. And I'm sure they do a lot of cross-platform testing as well. But and I know it is quite difficult with audio and video because the same method of capturing both isn't the same through all, not only all browsers, but also host operating systems as well. So there's quite a lot of permutations for them to go through and dive through. But it would be
yeah,
good if they could make every feature available on every platform, which is a tall order for a web developer, for audio and video especially. But the sort of things that I was thinking of, the sort of apps I saw have no excuse, because there is sort of an excuse if you're talking about audio and video, because to do that properly with the right timings across platform is quite a tricky task. But the the web app I was very disappointed with this medical study or university study was that it was just a very simple app that used timings to figure out how fast you clicked on things and how you ran things, and it would just
hmm,
throw up random green screens and do various odd things that it should never do because it wasn't programmed to web standards. And that sort of lower end web application should easily be able to run on every single device going.
Yeah.
I can see that the Ecamm guys do have a very good excuse because synced audio and video using lots of different interfaces and core audios and APIs and so on is actually quite a tricky process to do across every single platform. So I can cut the Ecamm guys some slack there, I think.
Well,
But when it comes to the simpler apps, you definitely want to follow web standards. There's no excuse for not following web standards, especially for something that is a medical study as part of a university to rank people's responses as part of the study. It's just going to ruin all the data. So I don't know why they even picked this terrible product that they ended up picking.
well, I'm gonna cut Ken and Glenn, the developers of Ecamm Live, even a little bit more slack because they have done what they've done something that they've been working towards for quite some time now. It is in the current version that I'm running right now, which is the 4.3 beta. I was trying to say it your way. Beta,
Beta,
the 4.3 beta. I'll say it my way instead. But they've done something with it that is just amazing, and that is built-in Zoom integration. So
Oh,
from this point forward, if I were to opt to use Zoom instead of their interview mode, and they can be used in combination as well. But if I were to opt to
perfect.
use Zoom instead, I can literally bring individual Zoom participants into the camera slots within
Wow.
Ecamm Live now. I can record their audio separately, and I can bring their chats. I can bring Zoom chats into the unified Ecamm chat room as well. It's
That is a brilliant solution.
amazing. And the way they did it is by working with Zoom to integrate the Zoom client into the Ecamm Live app itself. So I don't even need Zoom installed on the Mac because the
Wow.
Zoom client is built in to Ecamm Live. It's just an amazing development. They just released it this week. I had a little bit of, or was it end of last week? This week, end of last week? I can't recall. I think it was just this week. It was this week they released it. And the initial release had a little trouble connecting up, interestingly, through different browsers. So if you had different browsers, it couldn't pass the permission back to Ecamm Live to say, yes, yes, it's been authorized to sign up. The OAuth wasn't working through certain browsers. And they quickly released a beta 2, and it's working now. And it's pretty darn amazing. Pretty darn amazing that you can do that.
That's a really good solution because it gets around the problem of trying to talk to a myriad of APIs on different
Yeah.
systems, and you just then have to target one API, one Zoom API to rule them all. That
Yep.
sounds like a really good solution because that would naturally cross all systems.
The downfall to it is that in order to properly take advantage of it, especially for things like this, we've been recording for an hour and 9 minutes. In
Wow.
order to take advantage of it properly, you have to have a Zoom Pro subscription. Otherwise, you're limited to that same 40-minute time limit that Zoom limits you to with the free account. So that's the big downfall of it. So the question is it worth a Zoom Pro subscription to get around the interview mode issues, or do you stick with interview mode, or do you use a combination of both, which is a very possible way to do it. In fact, there's Skype integration in this too from way back in the day, and it's still there to this day. So you can actually bring people in from Skype
Wow.
calls as well. So
Oh yeah, yes.
there you
Don't
go.
get me started on Skype. That's a hot mess. There's all sorts of Skype clients, and there's several different Teams clients that don't talk to each other, and Microsoft are trying to integrate them all together, but not very successfully, and it's fragmented. It's all over the place.
It's a mess. But moving on. Here's a fun one that we've covered on the show in the past. In fact, we devoted an entire episode to it. It's that big of a topic. But I just wanted
Oh
to touch
no.
on it briefly here, and that is the myth that the Mac is immune to malware. Okay, so
Oh,
what's
that's
malware?
the
Well,
biggie.
it's a biggie, and again, I'm just going to briefly touch on it here. But let's start with what is malware. Malware is anything from viruses to adware to what they call pups or potentially unwanted programs, ransomware, Trojan horses. I mean, the list goes on and on. That's just scratching the surface of what constitutes malware and the sorts of nastiness that can await you if you click the wrong link or you download apps from untrusted sources or what have you, right? Well, the myth is that the Mac's immune to malware. The truth is that the Mac is not immune to malware. But I do feel that there's a strong argument to be made that you don't need to spend extra money on antivirus software to help keep your Mac safe. That's kind of at the core of this myth. And I think a lot of it is perpetuated by the antivirus makers.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Now, I know I'm a broken record when I say this, but in my opinion, Mac security comes down to just a couple simple things. Number one, keep your Mac and the software that you run on it up to date. That's it. Not only does this patch holes in the operating system, and there are holes being discovered in macOS all the time, it is not invulnerable to flaws. It has flaws, and those flaws are being patched. Some of the flaws being patched in macOS go back years and years and years to its Unix underpinnings. There was a rather large flaw discovered in a core piece of Unix software, what was it, just a year or so ago, that went back decades. And
Yeah.
it was only just discovered, patched, and that patch had to be applied to, yes, to Mac OS, because Mac OS utilized that piece of code within the core operating system. So yes, keeping your Mac and the software that you run on it up to date is super, super important. The other thing that does, though, is it updates things like XProtect. And we'll talk about XProtect in just a moment. The second thing you can do to keep your Mac safe is to only download apps from trusted sources. For example, the Apple App Store. That would be a trusted source. Another example would be the original developer of the app that you want to run on the Mac. For example, Adobe or Microsoft or a trusted third-party developer whose app you really, really want to download and run on your Mac. You're downloading it directly from them, not from some weird Google search you did to try to find the installer for it, right? So download it from trusted sources. And then third, give every link sent to you, every attachment sent to you, give them all the skunk eye. Just because it says it's going to adobe.com doesn't mean the actual destination is adobe.com. Hover over that link and look to the status bar of your browser to see where it actually leads to. That's super, super important. Even better, if you're not expecting the link and you can't verify that the sender intended that link to be sent to you, just don't click it. Just don't click it. So those are a few
That's
simple
what I was going to
things.
suggest, actually. Yeah,
Yeah,
to not click a link
don't
and
click
to
a
go
link.
there manually.
Go there manually. It claims to be UPS and some package is stuck on a truck down the block. And if you don't click this link, oh my gosh, the package is going to implode and you'll never ever see your product again. That's probably fake, right? Go to
Absolutely.
ups.com, type in the tracking number for the package you're trying to get,
Yeah.
and verify it through the original source. Go to your bank, verify the information that's allegedly been sent to you in this email, which generally won't be sent to you in an email. Go to your credit card company, go to apple.com, go to icloud.com, go to microsoft.com, go to the source directly within your browser, type in microsoft.com and go there and verify that the information being shared with you is correct. Very often, it won't be. It's a phishing attempt. Just give everything
Yeah.
the skunk eye. And that's probably one of the biggest things that you can do to keep your Mac safe. Okay, cool. So that's three things you can do. Again, we talked about this. In fact, I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. We talked about this quite a few episodes ago, Eric and I, and we spent the whole time just talking about ways you can keep your Mac safe. But what I did want to talk about, and I mentioned this a moment ago, is XProtect. XProtect is not something we see. We don't see it in the menu bar. We don't see it running all the time, but it is running all the time. It is a built-in antivirus tool that Apple provides. It's supported by Apple, and it ships with every Mac that leaves the factory and lands on your desk at home. It's signature based, like most antivirus software, so it depends upon updates. But the neat thing about XProtect is that those updates, unlike Microsoft Defender, the updates for XProtect don't come through your regular Mac OS updates that you might get when you go to
Yeah,
click and see what
that's
updates are
right.
there. It happens transparently. It happens in the background.
Yeah,
Let them happen. Let those signatures get updated. Let them get sent down to your Mac so that it can do its job of protecting you.
yeah. It happens very, very quickly as well. So um, if you were to try to, I mean, you've got permissions over your own machine, but you
Yeah.
have to be an admin to do it. You can go in and get rid of the XProtect signature file, for instance. But you find as soon as you log out and log back in again, it's back within half a second,
It's back.
because it's one of the first things the Mac does when it starts up is to make sure that that protection is in place before allowing anything else to occur. So, and there's also, it's not just XProtect though, and I think that's part of the misconception is that all of it is hidden away from the user, but it's hidden by design. It's Apple doesn't want to put loads of interfaces and things in front of the user to say, oh, here's 10 things that are protecting you. They're all running in the background, but they don't want the user interrupted with any of that. So it's all completely hidden, but it's supposed to be completely hidden to make the Mac a really nice user experience.
A seamless experience, right? And
That's it.
I just wanted to mention two other tools that Apple uses to help keep you safe. I think you were just about to mention this too, but the second one is Gatekeeper, and the
Yeah,
third one is the act of notarization, the act of assuring that third-party developers' apps are safe to run on your Mac. Gatekeeper is a tool that Apple uses to enforce code signing, and it verifies apps before they're run on your Mac for the first time. And
yeah,
notarization is, well, it's also a malware scanning service, but it's for developers. When a developer wants to distribute an app outside the Mac App Store, apps are submitted to Apple. They scan the software for known malware, and then if it's clean, they issue a notarization ticket,
yeah.
and then the developer adds that to their app, and then that sends Gatekeeper, when you go to run their app for the first time, it tells Gatekeeper, hey, I've been notarized. I should be safe to run. I've been checked by Apple, and you're good to go. So it's really those three things, XProtect, Gatekeeper, and notarization, that all kind of work
Yeah.
hand in hand to help keep your Mac safe. Gatekeeper works with notarization to prevent the execution of malware on your Mac. Gatekeeper, notarization, and XProtect block malware from running. And then XProtect by itself can help clean up malware that it's aware of. It can detect it and then help clean it up and prevent it from
Well,
executing.
that's sort of the different approach that Apple has to Microsoft, because Microsoft tools tend to be there to clean up the mess after it's happened,
Right.
whereas Apple wants to avoid the mess happening in the first place. And to be fair to Microsoft, Microsoft have become a lot better at that, at
Oh,
avoiding
Defender's awesome.
problems.
Yeah.
Defender has got a lot better. It used to have a bad name in the early days, but it's actually got a lot better now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing the same approach that Apple has always done, which is to avoid at all costs being infected in the first place. Because if you're not infected, there's nothing to clean up.
Right. Right. Exactly. So I just wanted to mention real quick, it, technically it's possible to turn off your Mac's automatic updates for the security responses and system files. If you turn that off, do you know, Darren, if you turn that off, does it also turn off the Xprotect updates, or do they still get deployed
No,
even if you turn it off?
Xprotect is separate, so that
It
will
is
still
separate.
carry on
Okay.
no matter what you choose. The other options in software updates um, are to disable additional updates from installing straight away.
Okay.
So security patches and so on. But I think Xprotect is separate, a completely separate process. As you say, it doesn't come down through the App Store process for updating or anything like that. It's a completely separate process.
Right. I just want to.
And well,
I
the
was
other
going to
thing I was going to
mention.
mention was,
Oh, go ahead.
oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead. Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
The other thing, there's, I haven't got used to this delay yet between the UK and the States. It's like, oh, there's a few seconds delay. Yeah, the only other thing I was going to mention is that developers have their own um, uh, digital signature as well for all the things that they develop with Apple, which is part of the notarization process. I believe you were talking about, and the upshot of that is that um, developers can't put a tiny foot out of place for fear of their developer digital signature being revoked. One of the things that Apple can do, they haven't needed to yet use the system-wide kill switch. There is a kill switch whereby a developer's entire library of applications can be revoked with a digital signature revoked, and then that developer is then banned for life from being able to develop applications for the Mac ever again. And they used it. Apple uses digital fingerprinting on the developers to make sure that if they rather sneakily try to make a new developer account, that they can be found out, and if they're part of the detected previous developer digital signature that was used, then they can revoke their new account as well. So developers have to follow the rules, or else that's it. They're kicked out, and they can no longer supply software to the Mac at all. They're banned forever.
And yeah, so you're talking about the ability to revoke a developer's certificates entirely to prevent them from
Yes.
developing for the Mac in the future. But Apple has revoked certificates for apps that have been discovered to be rogue apps that should never have been approved in the first place, should not have been released, or should not have
Well,
been
yes.
approved to run on Mac OS. They have revoked certificates so that Gatekeeper can legitimately pop up and say, hey, you really don't want to run this. Think about it.
Yeah, that's it. The system won't allow an app that's had its certificate revoked from running. It's impossible to run. So once it's discovered, it cannot run. So that's a better solution, because it means rather than having to have software to go in and clean up all these files, you don't need to clean things up because the nasty files won't run in the first place. There's no ability for the file to run.
Yeah.
So you can pretty much instantly stop a bad infection in its tracks. And there's also a big difference with how malware propagates from one machine to another and through devices and so on. So it's very different on the Mac. The Mac has an extremely extensive list of permissions that disallows most of those windows of opportunity that malware often uses on other platforms.
Yeah.
So you might find other platforms applications can spread around quite easily and quickly once they're installed. But on the Mac, that's often not the case. It just won't spread beyond the machine that it's actually on. So often only one machine is affected rather than a whole raft of machines. So that's another benefit.
Yeah. 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 We we don't want to say impossible, but
Oh no, no, not at all.
the
Very difficult.
likelihood the likelihood of something like that happening is slim. The other thing I like to say, and what I've always appreciated about the way Apple has set up Mac OS and the system files versus the user files, is that there are very few places for malware to hide on a Mac.
Mm,
There's
yeah,
only a handful of places that it can
yes,
hide and be executed when called upon. And
yeah,
that makes it much easier to detect. It makes it much easier to clean. And, thankfully, Apple has a great way to reload the entire system without losing any of your data if it comes to that. But more often than not, if you do get some sort of rogue adware or PUP, potentially unwanted program, or something like that, it's a much easier cleanup process than it is on Windows, where you might as well just torch the thing.
you might never find it.
You might never find it. I did want to mention real quick something I was getting at a moment ago, and that's where to check your settings for the various types of software updates that your Mac can apply. This is under your system settings. It's under general. It's under software update. And then next to automatic updates is a little eye in a circle. If you click
Yep.
that little eye in a circle, it'll come up and it will ask you, do you want to automatically check for updates? Turn that on, turn that
So I
off.
say yes, turn that on.
Yep. Do you want to download new updates when available? Turn it on,
I'd
turn
say
it
yes,
off.
turn that on. Yep.
The third is, do you want to install Mac OS updates automatically? Now, my answer to that is no. I don't install Mac OS updates automatically, although I don't recommend you turn it off. It's just something I prefer
It's a
not to
choice.
do. It's a choice. I prefer not to do it
Yeah.
automatically. I prefer to have a little bit more control to make sure I've got that backup installed or taken before I do the latest Mac OS update.
Yeah. I do the same actually, but I probably I'm a bit geeky actually. I quite like to run the update, as you say, when I want to install the new OS update. But I also like to read all the notes,
Right,
like a like a
right.
proper a fully paid up geek.
What is this going to fix versus what is this going to break? Those are the
Exactly.
things I like to fully understand before I install it. But the good news is, like I said, if you're regularly running updates, it is easy to roll back to a previous backup by going through recovery, macOS recovery. The fourth option is whether you want to install application updates from the App Store automatically. Again, I have that turned off.
So do I.
That's neither here nor there. If you turn it on, it's much more like your phone, where app updates are installed automatically all the time behind the scenes, and you never really have to think about it unless you opt to go in and pull down and see what's waiting and tap update
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
You can set up your Mac the same way. You can just say install applications from the App Store automatically. I personally turn that off. And then the fifth option is install security responses and system files. That should be turned on, and
Definitely turn that on.
that's on by default. And
Yes.
I believe they're all on by default, if I'm
Yeah. Yeah. I
remembering
think so.
correctly. That should be on, and that was the one where I questioned whether XProtect was part of that. But as you rightly pointed out, XProtect is its own process and should be getting
I think it's its
updated
own process. I think so. I hope I'm right there,
regardless
actually.
regardless of how that is set. But that is where you go to check what automatic updates are turned on, what automatic updates are turned off, and there are a couple in there you should keep on. Checking for updates is important. Downloading new updates when available, I leave that on. I like them to be ready for when I'm ready for them.
Yes, that's
And
what I do.
then install security responses and system files should be on as well. So that is the next myth that I wanted to cover, Darren, is that the Mac is immune to malware, and we know it's not. There
Yeah, it
is
isn't.
malware out there for the Mac, but it's much
Although
easier to
it's easy,
protect yourself.
it's that's it. Yeah, I was just going to say that. Sorry. Yeah, it's easier to fall foul of malware on Windows. Um, you can have all sorts of methods of things getting onto systems. Drive-bys, you can get issues whereby you just click a link and you don't need to do any interaction at all. Whereas the Mac's got a very, very high level of permission structure on its files, which disallows you from making any system level changes unless you choose to. So for a user on a Mac to be infected with anything, they have to actively, physically allow the infection to install and choose to do it. They have to type in their name and password and so on. And, but that's not true on Windows. You can breathe heavily in the wrong direction and you can be infected with something.
And that doesn't necessarily discount flaws in third-party software. If there is a flaw in Adobe Reader, which, by the way, you don't need, just use Preview. But if there's a flaw in Adobe Reader and that flaw
And there always is.
there always is. It's not quite as bad as Flash, but there's always flaws in Adobe Reader. And it's of the 0-day variety. In other words, it's something that can be taken advantage of before it's patched. You do have to be careful because the rogue PDF that you might open with Adobe Reader could potentially circumvent some of the protections in place that Apple has put to thwart these kind of things. So sometimes a third-party application with a serious security flaw can create quite a vulnerability for you. But that's why it's important to always keep your apps up to date as well. Even when there's a 0-day vulnerability, a company like Adobe is not going to let that sit out there too terribly long before there's a patch for it.
Oh yeah, not long. No.
Keep your apps patched, and my personal take on Adobe Reader is that it's not needed. It's not needed. Preview has come so far through the years that it can do darn near everything that Adobe Reader can do. Not
the worst
Acrobat
thing in
Pro,
my book,
but Adobe Reader. Yeah.
Sorry, the worst thing in my book about Adobe Reader is often vulnerabilities are part of every version. So you fix the next version, and then that fixed has things that need fixing in the next version. So it never ends. And the trouble is, Adobe Reader can be quite a big attack vector for malware and other viruses to try and get onto your system. It opens up things that shouldn't be opened up as a vulnerability point of view, and it needs patching so often. It's I almost class Adobe Reader as a virus in itself.
No, that was Flash Player. You're confusing the two.
Oh, well, both actually.
So, Darren, moving on from malware on the Mac, if you had to pick another myth that you would like to tackle, what would that be?
Oh dear, right. Okay, what haven't we looked at? I'd probably say, about the Files app. One of the things I hear from Android fans is that the built-in Files app available on the iPhone, for instance, and the iPad is not what they're looking for. What they often want to do is to copy and paste any file to any place on any part of the internal structure of their Android device, and often ruin it by the time they do it as well. Because although you have the freedom to copy things anywhere, you also have the freedom to destroy your device, and it's too easy to do. So rather sensibly, though, Apple decides that you shouldn't be poking around in those areas.
I would argue rightly so. If I want to be able to destroy my device, gosh darn it, I should be able to.
Oh dear, no. Well, that's where Apple would want to differ with you on that one. There, they believe that mere users shouldn't go meddling into the kernel levels and folder levels to stop the devices from working, and introducing, actually as a perfect example of introducing exploits and malware onto devices,
Sure.
purely because you're allowed to go into areas that you shouldn't really be allowed to delve into if you don't like, if you're not an operating systems expert, for instance.
Yeah.
So mere users shouldn't be doing this.
And joking aside, I do agree with you that the Files app does what it needs to do for the end user. In other words, the default Files application in iOS or Android really shouldn't allow you to muck about in the root operating system. It's just
No,
not
no, it's not
not a
sensible.
it's not sensible. It's not good from a security standpoint. I do fully understand the viewpoint, though. I understand
Yeah,
that
yeah.
there are users who want to be able to do that, and I do feel that if given the right tools, I should be able to do that on my phone as well. And that brings up the point that there are tools to do this. You know, we talked about
Precisely my
Ecamm
point.
Live.
That was going to be my point, actually. That uh, say, for instance, an Android or someone who's used to using Android may feel like they can't move over to the iPhone because of this limitation, and they're used to dealing with file managers in the way that they've been used to with Android, and they see the Files app as being a limitation. It's true that it looks like it's limited, but if you delve into there's an awful lot you can do with the Files app. But they also seem to forget that there's an app store out there, and if you want to have an expert level Files app to allow you to place files all over the place and do all sorts of things, that's available in the app store, and there's some wonderful app store apps are extremely powerful, as powerful and sometimes more powerful than the app managers, the file managers that Android users are expecting to see on their Android systems. So it shouldn't be it shouldn't just dissuade people from going down the Apple route, thinking that they're going to be completely limited in what they can do, because often that is a misconception.
Yeah, yeah. And the apps that you find in the iOS App Store have been vetted. They've been looked at.
Yeah,
They've been
entirely
peeked
safe.
at by Apple, and you know, Apple gives them their blessing and says this is safe. And if it's later determined that the app is not safe, well, guess what? It's no longer going to be in the App Store. But what I was driving at actually is we were talking about Ecamm Live a little while ago. Well, you know, the developers of Ecamm Live have a long history on the Mac platform. And one of the apps that they created many, many years ago that I had a license to, and in fact, I also had Call Recorder, but one that I had a license to was called Phone View. And it was a
Oh
great
yes,
way
yes, I've
to
heard of that
go
one.
in
Yeah,
and back up your messages, or, you know, create a standalone backup of your phone, or to pull files off your phone or put files back onto your phone, you know, that sort of thing. Well, they
yeah.
no longer develop that, but there is a companion app or a similar app that they now refer people to called iMazing. And
That's
those
the one. I couldn't remember the name.
those two alone, PhoneView and iMazing, are not the only choices. There are
Mm,
lots and lots and lots of apps that allow you, if you desire, to muck about in the file system of your phone, to do so, and to do so safely from the Mac. So,
yeah,
and of course from the PC, there's equivalent apps for the PC that allow you to muck about in the
yeah.
file system
That's
of an
right. Yeah.
iPhone as well. So yes, I'm agreeing with you. I'm going to let you finish your thought in just a moment, but I'm agreeing with you that the Files app itself should not allow a user to do that. But should a user determine, like I jokingly said, that if I want to mess up my phone, I want to be able to mess up my phone. If I really want to do that, if I really want to muck about in the operating system and delete things I shouldn't be deleting or whatnot, there are apps that allow you to do that.
This is true, although good luck trying to get support when it all goes horribly wrong and you go to the Apple store and they say, "Oh, what on earth have you done?"
You
Go
just
away.
reset it. You just reset it.
Well, yes, it's true. You can get around. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was going to just mention the Files app I use on the iPad,
Oh, sure.
which is called File Browser Pro, and that is a a really, really highly detailed file manager, allowing you to copy, read, write files, create, do anything to any location, any cloud location, any network share, any platform. It's literally able to do anything. Anything you can think of, file managers should be able to do. This does it. So I think the criticism of the iPad, for instance, for having a basic file manager, which isn't so basic if you delve in, isn't warranted, because you can just pop onto the App Store and download an extremely capable professional file manager application, and do all sorts of things that the average non-Apple user may not expect you can actually do on the iPad. But it's all there. It all works perfectly, and it's a fantastic app.
And you raised another great point. The Files app on iOS allows direct integrate. You can access your Dropbox files through there.
Yeah,
You can
yeah,
access
do all
your
sorts. Yeah,
what do they call it these days? Microsoft OneDrive. OneDrive,
OneDrive.
it
Yeah,
can be accessed through it. Box.net can be accessed through it. All these integrations are there to
yeah,
allow developers to say, hey, you want to access your Dropbox files through the Files app? Great. Here you go. Just turn it
yeah.
on, and now you can do
Works
so
great.
all from one interface, which is great. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, I pulled up File Browser Pro here while we were talking, and interestingly, the very first thing that comes up is File Browser Pro for the Mac. So these
Oh,
folks,
just
Stratospherics, they're the developers of this app.
that's it. Yeah, yeah,
Not only have they created File Browser Professional for iOS, but they also have File Browser Pro for the Mac. So if you're looking for something that provides, and there are lots of Finder replacements out there, but if you're looking for something that gives you just a little bit more than the Finder gives you, and
yeah,
this, by
yeah.
the way, is changing too. The file provider services from Dropbox and OneDrive and Google Drive and all that are now being integrated into the Finder. But if you want something that gives you a little bit more than what the Finder gives you, Darren's suggestion of File Browser Pro for the Mac might be a good choice. And if you don't need it on the Mac, File Browser Professional for iOS may be the way to go too. So, yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Well, let's see. I have one more myth. This is one we've also tackled on the show before. It's a favorite of mine because it's something that we've debunked several times already. And I think the truth lies somewhere in the fact that Macs have far fewer models to choose from, and
Ooh,
that Apple opts not to cut corners. But the myth is that Macs are expensive. Not only are Macs expensive, but they're more expensive than a PC. That is a
wrong.
big bugaboo for me because
Yeah,
we've proven time and time again, pick an iMac, pick a Mac Studio, pick a MacBook Pro. When you find the functional equivalent to that from a major manufacturer that produces good machines, by the way, and you factor in things like longevity, when you factor in things like how often they need service, when you factor in things like the bundle of apps that come with the machine out of the box, and you
yeah,
factor in things like resale value,
absolutely. Yeah,
try to get a good resale value on a Dell Latitude. When you factor all that in, the argument begins to fall apart pretty darn quickly. And I remember I took a note on this, and unfortunately I can't remember where I read this, but I remember reading somewhere that IBM, and yes, I mean that IBM, the International Business Machines, IBM, calculated that they achieve a savings of right around $550 for every Mac that they purchased instead of a PC.
yeah, because of the support being easier. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So my argument is, even when you take Macs versus PCs at face value, Take all that other stuff out of the equation. When you take them at face value, the biggest mistake is not comparing like models. For example, I just mentioned Dell a moment ago. I like Dell PCs. I think they're great. If you're going to buy a PC, you should probably look at a Dell first. That's just my opinion. I know people have other opinions on the best machines. Don't buy HP.
Oh,
But
that's a can of worms.
you can't compare a Dell Inspiron to a MacBook Pro. You just can't.
No, they're not like with like. They're not the same.
They're not the same. Not only is the build quality wildly different between the two models, you're also going to find a number of physical differences too. Not only in the processor and the storage and memory and so on, but to help Dell hit that magic end cap price point, they're going to make compromises. And those compromises are what bring people into the big box stores. Sure, an Inspiron might better compare to, say, a 15-inch MacBook Air, but then again, the exact same arguments apply. So, what I want to do for my final myth today, and I don't know if you have yet another one, Darren, but my final myth today, what I want to do is actually look at a Dell live while we're recording, look at
Okay.
a Dell that's closest to a MacBook Air and a MacBook Pro in build quality and components, and that
Yeah.
would be the Dell XPS. Now,
Okay. Yeah.
I've seen Dell XPSs firsthand. They're wonderful computers. They're well-built computers. They don't have that squishiness that you get in some of the lower-end computers. They're
That's it. They're higher quality. Yeah, that's it. When you're comparing like with like,
yep.
you have to remember that Apple only makes premium laptops. So
Apple
you need to compare those premium laptops against other PC premium laptops, or else you're not
exactly.
comparing like with like.
Yep. So let's just really quickly let's pull up
Yeah,
the
good
Mac.
experiment.
This is the same experiment we've done before, and I want to do it new. And unfortunately, I should have pulled up Apple's site before, but let's just pull up a MacBook Air, 13
Live
inch.
price matching. Wow.
Yeah, we'll pick the current model. We'll pick the current model. We know the 13-inch MacBook Air starts at 1099. Okay, great. So here's Dell's site for the Dell XPS. Again, you can just go to Dell.com, and right on their homepage, they say shop the XPS. They have the latest models on there. So shop the XPS. Great. So that's what I clicked. And the very first one that comes up is the Dell XPS 14. And they start at $1,699, $1,699. And we already
Yeah.
know that the MacBook Air starts at $1,099, $600 less
Yeah.
right out of the box. And the 14-inch, and here's a better comparison, the 14-inch MacBook Pro starts at $1,599.
Yeah.
So already there's a price discrepancy between the two. But let's scroll through this. And remember, this is Dell's starting at price, starting at $1,699, just like Apple starting at $1,599 price. OLED display, OLED display on the Dell.
Yeah.
But that's up to an OLED display. It's not what it ships with by default. It's up to an Intel Core i7 Ultra processor.
For extra.
Yep, hey, here's a bad aspect of it right out of the box. It ships with Windows 11. Windows 11 Home or Pro, and we know Pro is more expensive. It comes with up to an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4050 graphics card. It comes with up to 64 gig of memory. It comes with up to 4 terabytes of storage, and it comes with a 14.5-inch display. So that starts at $1,699.
Yeah, it's not the highest spec. So what GPU does it actually ship with at
That's a
that
good
low
question.
at the lowest price?
And this kind of comparison was always so much easier when Apple shipped with Intel. If only they would go back to shipping with
Yes.
Intel's much easier comparison. But yeah, let's see what it ships with. Let's see what this thing comes with for $1,699. and it
I bet
looks
the base GPU it comes with isn't terribly impressive for 1699.
well. It's an Intel Core Ultra 7 processor, 16 cores, up to 4.8 gigahertz, which those gigahertz are
Which
still
is,
important in the PC world.
yeah,
It comes with Windows 11 Home. It comes
oh dear.
with Intel Arc graphics, so the
There you
graphics
go.
that come with the Core. I still call it the Core i7. I'm sorry, the Ultra 7. It comes with 16 gig of memory, and it comes with 512 gig of PCIe storage, solid state storage.
Yeah.
So, and then the 1920 by 1200 display.
That's kind of low res for a Mac. That would be seen as bad in the Mac world,
It
but it's sort of
would indeed. So now the 14-inch MacBook Pro, let's look at that. And again, we're kind of comparing Intel to Apple Silicon, but we know from the tests that are out there how well the Apple Silicon processors perform.
yeah. But it'll smoke that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Speed wise.
even with the dreaded 8 gigabytes of memory, which is what the
That's the sticking point. That's the
that
thing that is the usual problem from the Apple point of view. I can see where that is actually because uh, the unfortunately I can't remember who it was, but the one of the Apple spokesmen did say that 8 gig RAM on a Mac is the equivalent of 16 gig RAM on a PC,
yeah,
which in a way that has a little bit of truth to it in a way, but really it isn't. And you can easily disprove that. So he fell into a bit of a trap there, and that was a bit unfortunate because that's one part where Apple does fall down slightly. But the trouble is that the RAM that Apple spec on their systems isn't your bog standard 30 quid RAM that you get on a stick to plug into a PC. It's not the same
right,
thing. It's
right.
much higher than that. So if you spec the same quality of RAM, you'd be spending about 100 to 150 pounds for the same amount on the PC anyway. Um, and the fact that Apple charges 200 for that is a little bit over the odds, but it's not over the odds by a huge amount because people are not comparing like with like. They're comparing the ultra cheap £30 RAM with the very high quality £150 RAM. So in that situation, when you do a RAM upgrade on a Mac, you're only about 50 quid out. Difference between the same quality of RAM on the PC as it is on the Mac to get up to 16. And like you just said, the starting price is quite high there already for the PC. So by the time you've added that RAM to bring the spec up to the same, you've still actually spent less on the Mac than you would on the PC.
E- Exactly. Now, while I do a little comparison here, I'm going to try to match these up as close as possible to do exactly what you just said. While I'm doing that, do me a quick favor and pull up what the Liquid
Oh dear.
Retina XDR display resolution is, because
Oh
they
dear.
don't show that. They don't show that on the order
Oh,
page. They just mention that it's a 14.2-inch display. They don't mention the
oh,
resolution of it. So I'm going to let you do the research on that because I'm going to try to
oh
make these as
dear.
functionally equivalent as possible. So rather than the 1920 by 1200, which I know the Liquid Retina display is much higher resolution than that.
Oh yeah, I believe it's 2160.
Yeah, that could be. But the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to bump it to Windows 11 Pro.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I don't think Windows 11 Home is really going to do it. So we're going to add $60 right off the bat to the Dell XPS 14 laptop. And then the next thing I'm going to do, we don't have another processor choice. This is it. It's the Ultra 7 processor. So we're just going to have to assume that 16 cores
That's
up to
fine.
4.8 gigahertz is functionally equivalent. And so cool. So Windows 11 Pro. I don't know. What do you think about the graphics card? I think The
Well,
MacBook Pro just comes with the. It doesn't come with a third-party
no,
graphics.
but
So,
how many GPU cores does that Mac model come with? I can't remember.
oh, that Mac model comes with that's
Is
the
that
10 core
that's a
GPU.
10 core? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I thought it was a 10 core. Yeah, that's equivalent to the lower to mid range discrete graphics. So one bump up from the Arc graphics. So I think Arc is the lowest end of that. So if you bumped that up one graphics card model up from there, you'd be sort of hitting the equivalent of a 10 core GPU on that on Apple Silicon.
All right. Well, let's be fair. Let's leave it at the Arc graphics then, because the next bump up is
Sure.
the
Yeah.
GeForce RTX. So let's not do that.
Ah, that's
Let's
a big
just
bump. That's quite a big bump.
that's a big bump, and we can bump up to the larger Infinity Edge touch display, 3200 by 2000. Now, we'll just ignore the fact that it's a touch display.
That's,
We know
yeah,
Steve
yeah.
Jobs' take on touch displays. He didn't like them. He didn't
You can
want
shave
them.
down your finger.
And honestly, I don't know anybody who uses a PC who likes the touch display or uses it or depends upon it. So, maybe cool, but I don't think that's super important. I would argue that the trackpad on the Mac is far more functional than a touch display on a Windows computer. But
Yeah,
we'll just say that's roughly the same. But I am bumping the display to the Infinity Edge 3200 by 2000 because I think that's much closer to
yeah,
the
it's closer.
the
The,
Retina
the Mac is
display.
actually a bit higher. I think it's 2160, but yeah, that's quite a close equivalence there. Yeah,
Right? Okay. And then the rest, it's a backlit keyboard on the Dell. Cool. It's got a fingerprint reader. Great. We don't need any systems management. We'll just, other than the display,
antivirus.
well, it ships with Windows Defender, Microsoft Defender. So we'll just,
Oh, okay, fair enough. Okay,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
Okay, so great. So now this Dell, with the only upgrades being made to it being Windows 11 Pro and the display, to bump it from that 1920 by 1200, which is admittedly on the low end. So we're going to
Mm.
3200 by 2000 for the display. That Dell 14-inch XPS laptop is $2,059. $2,059.
That's quite a
The
bit.
14-inch MacBook Pro with 16 gig of unified memory. I bumped the memory on it.
Yeah, yeah,
512 gig of storage, so same amount of storage.
yeah,
That is the default out of the box. It comes with the backlit keyboard. Gosh, guess what? There's nothing else to choose. That's it. That's what we get.
yeah.
So it's an M3,
What else do
8
you need?
core, 10 core GPU, 16 gig of memory, 512 gig of storage, 14-inch liquid retina display, et cetera, et cetera. Well, guess what? That is $1,799. We're
Yeah,
talking $300 difference.
yeah. And functionally, because I've seen comparisons of these two systems running, not just benchmarks, because that can be misleading. I've seen quite a few different YouTube videos of these two systems being compared, and the Mac does beat it out considerably on almost all levels.
Yeah.
So not only is it faster and a better machine, it's cheaper, and it also lasts twice as long. So when you come to upgrade, you've also got a much higher resale value, so you can upgrade to the next model, and that next model then costs you even less. So the misconception that Macs are expensive is absolute baloney.
Absolute baloney. And if I'm just going down the list here, I'll let everybody else do their own comparisons. And yes, you can pick and choose a little bit more with the Dell than you can do with Mac. But the XPS 13 starts at $1299. I would argue that's a little bit closer to the 13-inch MacBook Air, perhaps. And then they have a 16-inch laptop that starts at $18.99, and that one comes with the Intel Core Ultra 9, so the equivalent of the Intel Core i9. Intel's changed the name on everything now. But I would bet if we took that 16-inch and bumped it up, and we said let's put Windows Pro on there, and let's put a higher resolution display, and let's put more storage. Yeah, oh yeah. See, that comes with a 1920 by 1200. So let's put that up to a 3840 by 2400 display,
Yeah.
and just leave it alone. That starts at 2259. Now we're in this situation where a 16-inch MacBook Pro that starts at 2499 comes with 18 gig of memory and 512 gig of storage. Now that's a little on the higher end. But again,
Mm.
compare what you're getting from one to the other. Compare the build quality. Compare
Yeah.
as you rightly pointed out, the operating system. Compare the software that comes with it.
Compare the and also possibly compare the total cost of ownership that you're going to have with a Mac against a PC. I'm sure that since I started going down the Mac road myself, I mean, I've been doing this for quite a few years now. I think I've spent less money on my computer being a Mac owner than I have ever when I used to do everything on Windows machines. It used to cost me a fortune with Windows,
Yeah,
but now I actually spend less money. I think.
yeah. I would argue you do, and I don't know if you resell your Macs when you're done with them and you move on to a new model.
Yeah,
I do not.
yeah,
I know a lot of folks do, and the resale
I
value
do
of a
that.
Mac
Yes, yes,
is just, I mean, it is just leaps and bounds. You might as well subtract that resale value from the cost because you're going to get that back in the end. Now, if you
yeah.
turn around and try to sell an XPS, well, good on you if you can.
Depends how old it is. So you may not get anything for it.
You might not get anything for it, and same's true for the Mac. Same's true for the Mac.
But
But
I remember I spent £1,799 on a Sony Vaio when Sony made laptops. It was a rather lovely laptop, extremely good, incredibly good screen. Oh, you got
I've got one
one,
right there.
and it got to a point where I wanted to upgrade. In fact, that was the cusp. That was the previous machine before I had my first Mac. That was the cutover. And in the end, that laptop, which cost me an absolute fortune, I couldn't give it away. I ended up having to leave it on a desk, hoping someone would walk by and steal it.
My Sony Vaio actually came with a built-in TV tuner and a remote control. It came with TV
Yeah,
tuner
I think they were
software,
good
and
laptops. I liked
yeah,
Sony laptops. They were very good,
they were good laptops.
but
They were
very
good laptops.
expensive, and then virtually worthless after about 3 years.
So my point being, yes, Macs are expensive, but PCs are expensive too. You can't just say, "Hey, I saw this PC
Yes,
at Best Buy for $300," and say that's functionally equivalent to a MacBook Air
it's not the
or
same.
Pro. It's just
No.
not the same. And we'll even give Dell the fact that they're offsetting some of the aluminum in the XPS with carbon fiber, which is cool, but it's still not quite the same. It's probably more of a weight saving feature than anything. They're nice laptops. They have beautiful screens. They run Windows 11 about as well as you can expect any machine to run Windows 11, but they're just as expensive. And that's the point. When you compare
Yeah.
like to like, you're going to find that the Mac is often less expensive than a PC. And
And I'd
that's
argue it's a better investment as well.
a probably a much better investment in the long run. Absolutely. So, did you have any more to cover, Darren, before we wrap up here today?
Well, no, I think that was a good one actually to delve into the price as being one of those big misconceptions. Yeah, so
Well, then let's wrap things up with this episode's Essential App. As everyone knows, we gave our annual Essential Apps episode in January. We had so many we wanted to talk about that we said, let's do a new Essential App every episode for the rest of the year. And as you're our special guest this time, Darren, would you like to share an essential app with us?
Yeah, no problem. Although I forgot I was going to do this actually, so I've only just thought of the essential app, but it's rather geeky. It's something that you could delve into over many months to learn the intricacies of what you can do with it. But I think it's indispensable. It's a video conversion app, and it's
Ah,
entirely free as well. So my app pick is Handbrake, which
oh,
is an application made by developers in France. So, going on your earlier advice, be sure to go off to the developer's French website to download it, not any other dodgy version you may find if you try to Google it.
and you
But you
will.
often find it's the first hit when you search for Handbrake. You'll often see the .fr French website that you download it from, and it's cross-platform, but the Mac version is spectacularly good. I'd argue it's better and nicer to use than the Windows version. Um, and one of the things it does, which also shows off some of the clever things you can do with Apple Silicon now as well, is it lets you convert video using the video toolbox hardware encoder chips that are built into the Apple Silicon SoC, and it allows you to encode video at incredible speeds. And if you learn, this is where you have to delve in depth into it to get the best out of it. But when you learn a few tricks and tips inside using Handbrake, you can actually get quite good, efficient video files, H.265s, for instance, created using the hardware encoders on Apple Silicon Video Toolbox, and you'll get some very impressive video files. The cat's come to join me, to recompress your video streams into H.265 video, and it's a general video converter, so it'll allow you to drag and drop almost any video format that has ever existed and convert that into standards-based video formats that's across platform, using the Apple Silicon hardware to do hardware video encoding. And it's essential. Anyone who does anything with video should have a copy of Handbrake and should spend a few weeks to delve into how to make best use of it, because it's a stunningly amazing app and completely and utterly free for life.
Absolutely. And Handbrake has been one of those apps that has appeared on our essential apps list and not appeared on our list. It's something that goes back years and years and years on our essential apps, and I am so happy to have it back on the list again this year,
Excellent.
because it is absolutely essential if you do any kind of video conversion, and that includes converting DVDs to files you can play on your
Yes,
computer.
absolutely.
Handbrake is
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic for that. And to your
Or
point,
to give you some example, actually, sorry, to give you some example, when you convert a DVD using Video Toolbox on an Apple Silicon, and I've only got a very modest M1 Apple Silicon Mac. Um, when converting video files on my Intel Mac, it used to convert at about 5 or 6 frames per second. Um, and now if I don't put any filters in, I can convert video at 700 frames per second instead of 7. So
it's
it's that much faster.
Apple Silicon has made such a difference in my general workflow of stuff, things that I've just gotten used to getting up and getting a refreshed cup of coffee or something like that. I barely have time to think about it before it's done now. So, and Handbrake is absolutely one of those things that fully takes advantage of Apple Silicon and the technology that Apple has unleashed on this latest round of Macs. I did want to emphasize your point, though, is when doing a Google search for Handbrake, and we will put a link for Handbrake in the show notes, a direct link, handbrake.fr is their website. When doing a Google or Bing or whatever search you do, just be sure that that's the site you're going to. It's such popular software. There are so many knockoffs, so many malicious versions of it that pretend to be the official Handbrake and are not. Always be sure that you go to handbrake.fr when you are looking for Handbrake and want to install it on your Mac or PC or Linux box or whatever. Handbrake is absolutely fantastic and definitely an essential app.
Yeah. Well, it being free software, it's going back to the malware side of things and being careful where you get your apps from. One of the things that a ne'er-do-well person was trying to do, well, they actually successfully did, was they took the free version of Handbrake and they put it on the Windows App Store, but they charged for it.
Yeah.
So it was perfectly fine. It wasn't infected with anything, but they were misdirecting people. So rather than buying the free version, rather than just downloading the free version, users that looked first on the Windows App Store were sent to this other version that cost $2 or $3 or something like that. So thousands of people fell for that and made this this person who effectively just stole the software to resell it. It's just taking advantage of people.
Well, okay. The thing about open source software is it is out there for anyone to take and fork and create their own versions of it that they want to. To do that and release your own application with your own name and your own little spin on it is one thing. To do that and outright steal the name of the app whose source code that you're borrowing, that's not so cool. While I guess it's okay under the open source license to do that, it's not something you should do.
I don't think it's part of the license.
You know what? It's happened to Mac developers too. There's lots of awesome open source Mac software out there, and people have outright taken it and released it in the Mac App Store, and as you said, made tons of money off of it before they were caught and shut down. So, it is something you want to watch out for. And I will almost always go to the developer's site first and see if they do offer a version in the Mac App Store. Sometimes they do, often they don't. And if they don't, get it directly from them. And Handbrake is
one of the things you can do
want to get directly from them.
Absolutely. One of the things you can do with the Mac App Store as well is not only search for the name of an app that you can search for the name of the developer, and then it will show you all of the apps that developer makes, which is quite a nice way to then choose officially from the known developers page rather than trying to figure out which app is which. You can just search for the developer if you know who the developer is. So that's quite handy to do.
Oh, I see what you did there. Quite handy to do, huh?
Indeed.
And with that bad dad joke, that's going to do it for this episode of Mac Guys Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, I do love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, or a software or hardware problem with your Mac, be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments of this week's show notes found at formacguysonly.com, or drop me a line, mike@formacguysonly.com. And be sure to subscribe to the show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FMEOTV. Click the little notification bell and you can find out when we are going live. You can join the chat room and you can catch all the behind the scenes stuff that doesn't make the final cut of the show. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks to Darren for joining me this episode.
Oh, yes. Oh, what do I say? I forgot what I'm supposed to say. Roll the credits.
Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.
Okay.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Cue the music.
Oh, I think we need to cue the music, Mike.
Cueing music.